Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Joseph Hayat.
Gayatri is insisting on some maternity leave. Thanks, by the way, for all the good wishes, and mother and baby are doing well. So young Joseph here, one of my brightest proteges, is standing in. The Freedom of Speech Brigade are out in force, trying to bludgeon RT into accepting their anti-Russian Cold War crusade narrative over Ukraine. The old 2-week historical memory is back.
Forgotten is the fact that Kiev is now ruled by a government which came to power as a result of a violent Western-backed coup against the former elected government.
Forgotten, too, is the fact that 49% of Ukraine's population who speak Russian have refused to accept this coup and have risen up against it. Nowhere mentioned is the fact that the Kiev regime promptly began an aerial bombardment of their own people, which is usually a cue card for demands for Western intervention.
Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 was cleared by Eurocontrol to route over the war zone, where several aircraft had already been shot down by the anti-Kiev rebels. Ukrainian air traffic control kept the aircraft flying at 33,000 feet, over an area many other airlines like Qantas and Cathay Pacific were refusing to fly over at all.
It came down with the loss of all 298 people on board, and nobody knows yet what happened to it, nor the previous Malaysian airline flight 379 a few months ago. Joining us now to discuss the tragedy and the context in which it must be set is our own Ukraine expert, writer and broadcaster, Neil Clark. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Hi, George.
It seems that for some on the right, the Russophobic right in Britain, you're not allowed even to question this narrative.
I was asked to go on RT shortly after the news broke last Thursday about the tragic crash, and I was on about an hour afterwards, and I was asked what I thought was responsible, what I thought had happened. And I said, of course, it's too early to say. We didn't know whether it was connected to events on the ground in Ukraine. We should keep an open mind. And I said we should stay calm and stay forensic about our approach. And yet, having said that, I then go onto Twitter and find I got enormous abuse from trolls on Twitter accusing me of supporting the plane being shot down, of being a Putin apologist, a contemptible Stalinist, all this abuse I got, simply because I didn't go on television and say it was President Putin's fault. President Putin shot this plane down.
These people found Russia guilty of a crime that the US intelligence services now exculpated Russia from.
Yeah.
Before the bodies of these poor victims were even cold.
Absolutely, and the frightening thing is you don't even have to say, oh yes, it was the Ukrainian government did this, or it was the US that did this, or whatever. All you have to do is let's stay calm and let's examine all the possibilities. No, you've got to come out there by order of the Free Speech Brigade to go out there and say it was Russia, 100% Russia's fault.
Well, one theory is that the rebels shot it down. Second theory is that the Ukrainian government shot it down. The United States intelligence has said there's no evidence of any Russian involvement in the shooting down of the airplane. But there's new satellite images of 2 Ukrainian Air Force jets in the vicinity of the airplane very shortly before the crash. What do you know about that?
Well, absolutely. We've seen the evidence of this, and Ukraine hasn't come up with an explanation for this at all. And in the British media, there's been very little coverage of this, very little coverage of any alternative theories. And Ukraine has got a lot of explaining to do. There's a lot of questions. For example, the air traffic control records, we want to see them. There's reports that they've been destroyed. And if so, that's quite extraordinary that the Ukrainian authorities would do that. And why were Ukrainian jets flying close to this airliner?
My theory was this. I thought it had been debunked very quickly, but it's back now on the table. I believe the first Malaysian airliner was the victim of a terrorist attack. So might the second Malaysian airliner have been the victim of a terrorist attack? And it now turns out that there's some evidence of shrapnel damage on the cargo door of the fuselage of the aircraft, which would point in the direction of a bomb in the cargo hold, which brought the airliner down. This too is a potential explanation.
Absolutely. And it seems we're not allowed to focus on the very strange fact that 2 Malaysian airliners have come down in a very short space of time. And Malaysia is an independent country, George, an independently minded country that's got some powerful enemies. We know that Bush and Blair were found guilty in the Malaysian Court of War Crimes. Malaysia plows its own furrow. And so it's, again, a perfectly plausible explanation that the Malaysian Airlines has been targeted in this way through a bomb.
Put this in context now. Here we have a raging war going on in the east of Ukraine. I mean, 2 Ukrainian Air Force jets shot down by the rebels since the plane crash. Bodies lying all over the streets, not only unburied, but uncollected, as a government backed by the West massacres its own people by bombs from aeroplanes, the very thing that we joined the attack on Libya.
Quite,
for the possibility of that happening.
And here it is happening, in fact, in Ukraine. And the usual liberal left humanitarian hawks are silent. And of course, the other contrast is with the situation in Gaza at the moment. Because, yes, 298 people lost their lives on the plane. It was a terrible, tragic incident. But over 700 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza this week, George, or in the last couple of weeks.
Most of them women and children.
Most of them women and children. And yet, while Russia is being held guilty for the shooting down of the plane or the crash of the plane, without evidence, Israel is being held innocent by the Western elite for the crimes it is directly committing in Gaza.
Live on television.
Live on television. So the double standards surrounding this whole incident are absolutely outrageous.
So how's the war in Ukraine playing out, and what's going to happen?
Well, what's happening is that President Poroshenko has been given the green light by his US sponsors to murder and massacre civilians in the east of Ukraine. And I'm afraid, unless the US changes its policy, this is only going to continue. They've even been killing people very close to the flight crash zone this week. So Poroshenko gets his orders from Washington, we know that. United States has created this crisis in Ukraine, this civil war. They wanted to get back at Russia for thwarting its plans to topple the Syrian government. And this Ukraine is the battlefield. And United States really is responsible for this, and the EU as well. And it will only continue, it will continue so long as the US wants it to continue. And it's a tragedy that's not being reported. If this was happening anywhere else in Europe, well, you've got a government in Europe that is murdering, it's massacring its own people, hundreds of its own people, airstrikes. And as you said, in Libya, we went to war against Gaddafi on the basis that he might be about to massacre people. Here, people are being massacred, and we're doing nothing.
What about the prospects? Can the Kiev government prevail? Will they eventually overwhelm the rebels?
I don't think they will, because I think we've got to understand the real hatred now in the East towards this government, an understandable hatred, because the people in the East wanted to negotiate, they wanted to have a federal solution. And Poroshenko, since he's come in, he launched the offensive at the beginning of July. It's been a brutal offensive. And if you bomb people, if you destroy their homes, if you kill civilians, then this only makes the people more angry, obviously. And it puts peace much further back, as we see with Israel's actions against the citizens of Gaza. So I don't think they will prevail, because I think the people in the East are determined not to give in here. And Poroshenko doesn't control most of his country, or large chunks of his country. And he shouldn't be allowed to win, really, George, because if he wins, this will be a victory for fascism. We can't sit back and allow this regime to win in Ukraine. This is a very important issue.
He's not himself a fascist.
No, he's not himself a fascist, but he's come to power with the help of fascists. He's got fascists in his government.
And it's very hard to get clarity on this story, isn't there? I mean, most of the, aside from RT, the only real resource I've managed to find is from the Aviation Herald and from aviation expert, sites and enthusiasts, because there's just simply no clarity. I mean, there was reports that the aircraft early in the week potentially was being followed by Sukhoi Su-25 Ukrainian Air Force jets, but then there's reports come from the Russian side suggesting that these aircraft couldn't possibly have a service ceiling of altitude to fly with that aircraft equipped with weapons. But of course, what we are seeing as well on social media, aren't we, is perhaps the speculation that there could be, and I mean, these are only speculative thoughts, another party involved in this process, perhaps nothing to do with the actual region, as a kind of spotlight away from the situation in Gaza. Is that plausible?
Yes, I think so, definitely. I think that this is obviously what we've got here is a massive geopolitical incident here that's being exploited by people. We know that the Western elites are violently anti-Russian and anti-Putin, and they want the general public to be anti-Putin as well, and anti-Russian, and it hasn't worked up to now. I mentioned this last time I was on the programme, that this sort of Russophobia has been very much an elite phenomenon. And so what we're seeing is exploitation of this tragedy to pursue a existing anti-Russian agenda. And as you said, we could have evidence, it could be that other state actors were involved in this. We don't know yet. There's certainly been beneficiaries. I mean, obviously, the timing of it was very beneficial to Israel, because the very night that this happened, Israel launched its ground offensive in Gaza. And so that we need to look at the bigger picture here. There are a lot of people who have gained by this tragedy, unfortunately.
And the Al-Qaeda, ISIS phenomenon, these are also potential suspects, because they don't like the Malaysian government either.
No, they don't.
And the extremist factions around Al-Qaeda, splitting off from Al-Qaeda and so on, may well have been responsible for other very recent aviation disasters. We wait more evidence on that. Final word, Neil. You say it's not working. RT's numbers are continuing to grow despite all the propaganda. Maybe that's why the propaganda is there. Do you think they're going to succeed in turning the British people against Russia?
I don't think so, because I think it was interesting last weekend when this Russophobia was at its peak in the media, wasn't it? All these headlines about Putin's missile, Putin's killed my children, etc. That millions of people were marching around the world for Gaza. And this shows to me the disconnect between the elite and the people. The people are outraged about Gaza because they see Israeli war crimes before their very eyes and the whole injustice of the whole thing. Whereas with Russia, they can see, I think many people can see through this now. They know that the Western elites want us to hate Putin. It's so obvious, it's so transparent, their agenda.
Thanks very much indeed for enlightening us. Coming up after the break, it's all over, bar the shouting about Brazil's miserable performance, that is. The World Cup has come and gone, so what's next for the emerging political and economic behemoth, Brazil? We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sputnik. Many billions of dollars were expended by Brazil on the recent World Cup. By popular acclaim, the best World Cup in decades. The bill might not have made so many Brazilian eyes water, however, if the home team's performances hadn't been so melancholy. Brazilian football, on this evidence, is a mere shadow of its former self.
But Brazil itself has never been stronger, more influential and more prosperous. Even before the tournament began, there were signs of an unease amongst the people of the South American giant.
Strikes, demonstrations and a renewed focus on the maldistribution of Brazil's great wealth were and now are more and more evident. Joining us now to discuss what's next for Brazil is Marcio Delgado, a considerable expert and a Brazilian. I don't want a promise to make you cry, but it was a fantastic World Cup. But the Brazilian team were the worst Brazilian team in living memory.
It is true. As a Brazilian myself, I'm still in shock, especially after the last match against Germany. I think it was a shock for everyone, even my German friends. Yes, they could not believe there were too many in too little time. Like, after 20 minutes, it would be difficult even to think about anything. Exactly, it was very, very hard. So it's incredible for all the wrong reasons, I would say. But yeah.
Well, I mean, it must make the bill, which is I think $11 billion, all the harder to swallow for the Brazilian people.
It is, especially because as we're going to have election this year, so everything is controversial right now. What to do with such much money that has been invested in 12 different states where they've been kind of hosting the games. So, and we have those big white elephants, and what to do with those. You don't have like a proper project, and because of the elections, everyone is kind of thinking about how can I get re-elected or how can I get into the politics? And really, it's no longer like a big priority in terms of let's look back what we've done wrong and let's do something with the legacy in terms of physical buildings.
Well, everyone who's ever hosted an Olympic Games or a Winter Olympic Games, I don't know about Sochi, the last one, but almost everyone who's ever hosted one of these big tournaments complains for many decades afterwards about the white elephants that have been left behind. Now, is this likely to cost the Brazilian president her seat?
That's a good question. She's not as popular right now as the former president that we used to have, Lula,
yeah.
that he was re-elected twice, and he was very popular. But she tries to go into his footsteps and do something. And was very well received, the World Cup, even with all the troubles that we had in terms of money, the costs. I think it happened a lot, something that happened here as well, 2012 with the Olympics. The Brazilians, they complained a lot, but as it got closer, people started to warm up to it. People started to come together, and they were really happy as well, because around the world, everyone was talking so many good things about Brazil, and that has been one amazing World Cup. So, yes, for her, that was a very, very good kind of business card. But there are other candidates as well in Brazil, and they are using the things that didn't go that well, including the multi-million price of an event like that against her. So it's really a controversial now, and they are using, as I just said before, the fact of what to do now with those big white elephants there, and there is no concrete project there.
The London Olympics was a huge success for the people who organised it. It was Mr. Blair's Labour government that won them and piloted most, actually, of the pre-Olympic period, and then the Conservatives were in power when the tournament actually happened. So there was no possibility of one side attacking the other. But that's not the case, I think, in Brazil, which indicates an underlying issue. There is what Joseph, I think, said in the introduction, an unease, a malaise to some extent in Brazil. It's never been richer, it's never been more powerful, never been more influential, but it's not really a country at ease with itself. Why is that?
I think the social gaps that we have there, they are huge, and we are really talk about it's so big that's difficult to even to picture in real life. It's something like a film. You have those houses, and you have like TV presenters getting paid like around £1 million per month, and it's £1 million per month. It's like 3 million.
I should move to Brazilian
You should
TV.
move there. Well, you have to get on with the language first. How's it going? Your Portuguese? Good.
Not too bad.
And then they even cannot drive. They have their own helicopter to get them from A to B, even the studios in the same city. And
whilst
then
in these favelas,
just behind it, and they really in a very bad condition. They have to make with a few dollars per day if you just convert the national currency in terms of salaries. So I think that makes the whole thing so controversial, so difficult, because the gap is not like you have like a little bit difference, someone that has a bit more of money, someone that doesn't have as much.
And I've heard reports, obviously, that contraband is obviously quite cheap as well. Is that correct?
Yes, on the
and readily available, yeah?
Yes, on the streets. And they are kind of, throughout the World Cup, they were working hard to kind of stop it, especially because the whole media was looking to Brazil. But you can buy anything on the streets there in terms of fixed products and things like that.
And crime is a real issue as a result of the economic inequalities. Yeah?
And I think that was the thing that everyone was more scared of. I mean, myself as a Brazilian, as someone that lives overseas and there all the time as well, and the politicians, because that was the big thing that had to be tackled somehow, because it's well known. Of course, we always have to bring it into context. Sometimes you see something on TV about Brazil, a shooting or something like that. It's an isolated area specific that it happened. We are talking about a country with 200 million people. So it's a massive country, and sometimes something happened in one specific place, Rio, São Paulo, that are massive cities, and it just get blown out of proportion in terms of media because it sells.
What's the balance between rich and poor? I mean, are we talking 1%, 99%? Is there a middle class?
There is a middle class now after those two governments, Lula and now Dilma. There are lots of social projects, and as we said at the beginning, the economy is kind of warming up. The Brazil is coming out of the shell, finally. Since I was a kid, I was growing and listening to the fact that Brazil is the country of the future, and the future took quite a while to arrive. But there is a massive gap of it. probably 1% and then 99%, divided between the two and the middle class. The middle class basically are the ones that would be working for the government or public sector, because those are the ones that you have to go and to compete against lots of other people as well, and you have that stability. You cannot be sacked. So it's not only about the money, but it's about something as well.
Security.
It's a security that you have, then you can get a nicer house, you can get a better mortgage, and so on. So, and then you move up.
And what about politically? No sooner had the World Cup gone, but a big political summit took place. All the world leaders headed for Brazil. Is the Brazilian population glad that Brazil is now talked about as a big power in the world?
It is. I don't think that they fully understand, and especially if you bring it towards politics. Even there, you have to go and you have to vote. It's kind of you cannot choose not to go and vote. You have to do it on the day, otherwise you pay a fine, something like that. But in terms of the projection that people are aware of, it's much more when they talk about the tourism or now the World Cup, but we don't have World Cup every year or always. So people are not really aware of that connection of how Brazil is coming really.
They're not aware of their own country's weight.
When you're there, it's
world.
difficult to just see the whole picture because you just see the transport that is still very bad, the public transport. You see the education, the hospitals, that you have big queues to get to the hospital to see a doctor, and it takes a little while to get an appointment with your GP. So they just see really what's happening around them because there's so much going on in your daily life.
Well, that's interesting and takes us back to football, because I think I'm right in saying that virtually none of Brazil's football squad actually play football in Brazil, that all of them play overseas.
They do.
And yet Brazil is a very rich country. If TV presenters are paid £1 million a month, clearly there's the money in the country to keep your best players in a Brazilian league. Why has that never happened?
I think what happens, there are culture overseas. Brazil is waking up for that right now, and they are talking a lot about the project for the very young ones, the ones that are coming out right now, like 15, 16 years old boys that plays well. In Brazil, you don't have that. It's like you don't have big projects to keep those very good players there when they are warming up and become big names. By the time that they get to 21, somebody else overseas already took them and kind of invested. So that's what happens a lot. We don't have internally, and that's a big problem. We don't have projects in schools that has a kind of a long time, a longevity. Everything is very kind of immediate. Like they do something for 6 months, 1 year, one project. Then when they change the government or when the budget run out, they just stop it and somebody else comes with a new project, somebody totally new, and they just discard everything that has happened. We have a history of it, of